If you've ever walked away from a hard conversation thinking, that just made things way worse, this episode is for you. Most people think that the goal of conflict is either to win or to make it disappear as fast as possible. So we'll avoid it, we explode in it, or we smooth it over and we just pretend that we're fine. But what if conflict wasn't a sign that something is broken, but rather a sign that something important is on the table? And what if the real goal wasn't winning, but finding a path forward together, even if you don't fully agree? Today, we're going to talk about how to manage conflict effectively so it actually moves you forward instead of keeping you stuck. We'll cover what conflict really is, the main types of conflict, how power and hierarchy shape every conversation, the difference between conflict resolution and conflict management, what to do when you hit an impasse, and then practical tools that you can use right now, this week. So let's get into it. Let's start simple. What is conflict? I like a plain definition. Conflict is a perceived clash of needs, values, goals, and perspectives. It's not just yelling. It's not just big arguments. It's not even really fighting. Conflict is any moment where there's friction because what I want, need, or believe seems to bump into what you want, need, or believe. And anywhere there are humans, there's conflict. If you have a team, a family, a partnership, conflict is built into the system. And that's not automatically a bad thing. In fact, conflict often shows up because people care. They care about the work. They care about the outcomes. They care about being respected. They care about their values. So instead of treating conflict as this scary red flag, I want you to think about it as information or data. Conflict is like a highlighter. It shows you where maybe expectations are unclear, boundaries are being crossed, priorities aren't aligned or don't match, systems are breaking down, they're not working. The real problem isn't that conflict shows up. The real problem is how we respond when it does. So as you listen today, I want you to keep one question in the back of your mind. What is this conflict trying to tell me? Not how do I get rid of it, but instead, what is it revealing to me? Now that we have a definition, let's make this more practical. This is something that I emphasize a lot when I teach classes on conflict management and when I work with folks in conflict. Not all conflicts are the same. And if you treat every conflict the same way, you are going to overreact to some and underreact to others. So a simple framework I like uses 4 types of conflict. The first one is task conflict. This is about what we're doing. Maybe we disagree about priorities, strategy, or the solution that we should choose. Number 2 is process conflict. This is about how we do the work. Who decides? Who's included? How fast do we move? How do we communicate? The third one is relationship conflict. This is about the people and the history between them. Maybe someone feels disrespected, talked over, or judged. Tone, body language, past hurts all live here. And then the fourth one is values conflict. This is about deeper beliefs. This is things like fairness, ethics, identity, purpose. The reason this matters is that different types of conflict need different tools. It's also important to know that you may think you're in a task conflict with someone, but they may be in a relationship conflict with you. And so it's important that we name it so that we identify what is the conflict that's happening. But so let's talk about like task and people. Task and process conflicts can actually be very healthy when they're handled well. So like 2 people arguing about the best strategy can create a better strategy. A disagreement over a process can lead to a smoother way of working. Relationship and values conflict are a little bit more sensitive because they go deeper. You can't just logic your way through them. They require more empathy, curiosity, time, and emotional intelligence. So next time you feel tension, pause and ask, is this about the task, the process, the relationship, or our values? Just naming the type of conflict makes it less overwhelming and more workable. It moves you from, oh, everything's on fire, to, okay, this is a process issue, or, oh, actually, this is a values clash. And now you get to choose a better response. We can't talk about conflict without talking about power. So when I say power, I mean who has more control over decisions, resources, or consequences in this situation. Power comes from obvious places like title and role. So think like manager versus direct report, parent versus child. But it also comes from expertise. So the person who knows more about the topic. It comes from social capital. Who's more trusted or liked in the group? This is also known as referent power. Access to information. Who has information that others don't? And money and resources. Who controls the budget? In conflict, power shapes everything. It shapes how safe people feel for speaking up. It shapes what they're willing to say out loud. And it shapes whether they push back, comply, or check out. If you're the person with the power in a situation, maybe you're the leader, the founder, the parent, your job is not to pretend power doesn't exist. Your job is to use your power to create safety, not to win. You have to share your power. This might sound like, hey, I know I'm your manager, and that can make this feel risky. I really do want to hear where you disagree, and there won't be backlash for being honest. Or, I'm aware that I'm the one who ultimately decides here. Before I do, I just want to understand what matters most to you in this situation. On the flip side, if you have less power, it's also important to be honest about your constraints. Choose your timing and your channel wisely. And sometimes focus first on building enough trust and influence that your voice can actually land. When people ignore power, they say things like, we're all equal here, but nobody actually experiences it that way. That's not true. That's a lie. When people acknowledge power, they can design the conversation more thoughtfully, invite quieter voices in, and reduce fear so that conflict becomes productive instead of dangerous. Now, we need to make a very important distinction. We need to talk about conflict resolution versus conflict management. I've been doing this work for a long time, and those two get conflated, but they're actually not the same thing. Conflict resolution is about ending a specific conflict. So we reach an agreement, we close the loop, and we move on. Conflict management is about how we handle conflict as an ongoing part of life and work. So it would be the systems, the habits, and the skills that we use every time conflict shows up. Here's why this matters. If you're obsessed with only resolution, you'll be tempted to rush people into agreement, glaze over real issues just to keep the peace, and avoid hard topics because they're messy and slow. But if you focus on management, your questions change. You start asking things like, how do we want to handle disagreements on this team? Conflict ground rules. What norms do we have for giving feedback? What do we do when we hit a stalemate? How can we surface tension earlier before it explodes? And I use teams as an example, but you can do this with loved ones, family, your partner, because conflict is conflict. But these are things you want to think about, like how can we create conflict ground rules? How do you want to handle disagreements as a couple or as a friend group, whatever it is. But in other words, resolution is an event. Management is a practice. Healthy teams and healthy relationships don't live in a fantasy world where conflict disappears. They build a conflict management system that says, we expect conflict and we have a way to handle it. We care more about honest, respectful tension than fake harmony. And that shift from how do we end this to how do we handle this well changes everything. Now let's talk about the classic conflict styles. There are lots of models, but a common one uses these 5. And I want you to think about yourself. And when I describe them, I want you to just think about which one is the one that you naturally lean on when it comes to conflict. So there's these 5 styles. The first one is avoiding. So basically, I'm backing away from the conflict. I'm not addressing it. I'm just going to pretend it's not there. Number 2 is accommodating. That's you win, I'll give in to keep the peace. So I'll just give you what you want. Then there's competing. I push hard for what I want. And then there's compromising. We both give something up to meet in the middle. And then there's collaborating. We slow down and look for a solution that works well for both of us. Avoiding isn't always bad. It's actually useful when the issue is really minor, emotions are too hot, or you need time to think. The risk is that important issues never get addressed. Accommodating can protect the relationship in the short term, especially when the other person's need is much bigger than yours. But the risk is resentment if you always give in. Competing is about standing your ground. It's useful in emergencies, when a quick decision is needed, or when a clear boundary has to be enforced. The risk is you create winners and losers, and people will stop being honest with you. Compromising is that meet in the middle move. It's practical and efficient, but sometimes you end up with a solution that nobody actually wanted or loves. Collaborating is where you slow down and say, let's understand what really matters to both of us and see if we can design something that honors both sets of needs. It's powerful, but it takes a lot of time and trust. But here's the key that I want you to remember. There is no good or bad, right or wrong style. And there's this pressure to always collaborate. Note that sometimes collaboration is not the appropriate resolution style. So don't feel compelled to collaborate because other people want you to collaborate. Maybe you have to avoid, maybe you have to accommodate, maybe you have to compete or compromise. But there's no right or wrong here. It's just what's appropriate for the situation. But problems show up when you only have one style. You use the wrong style for the situation. You're not honest with yourself about the style that you're actually using. So a great question to ask yourself is, what's my default conflict style when I'm stressed? Do you disappear? Do you bulldoze? Do you rush to it's fine even when it's not? Self-awareness here is huge. Because once you name your default, you can start to choose a different style on purpose when the situation calls for it. My default is actually competing. Yeah, I naturally just like bulldoze. I've learned to not lean on that, but I know that's my default. Now we have to talk about resolutions because what does that mean versus like a solution? Here's a subtle but really important shift. Resolution is not a perfect solution. It's a path forward. We often hold on to this fantasy that a resolved conflict means everyone fully agrees, no one is disappointed, and old hurts magically vanish. In real life, resolution usually looks more like we understand each other, we have agreed on a next step that both of us can live with, and we've decided how we'll handle this topic going forward, even if we still see parts of it differently. Think of resolution as choosing a path you can walk together, not discovering a perfect answer that makes everyone equally happy. So instead of asking, did we solve this perfectly? Try asking yourself, do we both understand what matters most to each of us right now? Do we have a next step we both accept? Do we know we'll revisit this if needed? Do we both understand what matters most to each other now? Do we have a next step we can both accept? Do we know how we'll revisit this if needed? That mindset takes the pressure off one magical conversation and focuses you on progress. Sometimes the most honest resolution you can reach is, we still disagree about some things, but we've chosen a way forward and we're both willing to try. And again, the resolution, you may not be happy, but you've moved forward instead of being stuck, which takes us into the next part. Because sometimes you hit an impasse. And an impasse is that moment where you've both explained your side, you understand each other's positions, you've tried a few options, and you're still stuck. It feels like we're going in circles, we're having the same conversations again and again. It's important to know that an impasse is not failure. It's just a signal that the issue might be bigger than this one conversation, that the cost of moving may feel too high by one or both people, or that you're trying to solve the wrong problem. The most unhealthy thing that you can do with an impasse is pretend it isn't there. A healthier move is to name it. So it could sound something like, it feels like we reached an impasse, we both understand each other, and we still don't have a path we're both okay with. Once you name it, you can decide together what to do next instead of grinding away at the same arguments. So what do you do when you're at an impasse? Well, let's talk about some practical moves. 1, change the question. Sometimes you're stuck because you're asking the wrong question. Instead of who's right, you might ask, what problem are we actually trying to solve? What outcome would make this feel good enough for both of us? And what's the smallest next step we could take to test a direction? Shifting the question can unlock new options. Number 2, surface what really truly matters. A powerful move in conflict is to ask, what matters most to you in this? And you'll often hear answers like, I don't want to be blindsided. I want to know that my work is valued. I'm worried that this will burn out the team. I don't want to compromise our ethics. Once those deeper needs are on the table, you can look for solutions that respect them, even if the original positions don't match. And I always like to remind people, we have to remember, the issue is rarely the issue. It's all the underlying stuff like values, self-perception, self-esteem, past experiences, how we see the world, that those all shape how we engage in conflict. So just surfacing what truly matters lets you get to the core. Number 3, propose a time-bound experiment. When you can't agree on the right path, try this line. What if we treat this as an experiment for 30 days and then review? So instead of committing forever, you agree on a short trial, you define what you'll watch for, you'll schedule a check-in, and what this does is it lowers the risk, but it also gets you moving again. The 4th tip, bring in a neutral third party. In some conflicts, especially at work, bringing in a neutral person can unblock the situation. So it could be a manager, a mediator, an HR partner, a trusted peer, or in your personal life, it could be a friend. But this is a mediator. And the mediator is there for both of you to help facilitate a conversation. I've done mediation for leaders and teams. I've done mediation for friends. And it helps to have a third party that is neutral to the situation. Now, something to note about that, let's also be careful of conflict triangulation. That's when one person brings somebody into the conflict. So I see this the most in relationships. So somebody's with their partner, they get a fight with their partner, and they just go to their best friend and they talk about them and they vent about them and they say all the things that person did. So then the best friend now hates the partner, the boyfriend, the girlfriend, and then the friend forgives the partner and moves on. But now you have somebody, the best friend, who now hates this partner or doesn't like this person because they were triangulated into a conflict and they only had one side of the story. So that's avoid triangulating people into your conflict. Agree on bringing in a neutral third party to move past an impasse. But you have to talk about it. Not one person just reach out to somebody to vent. You have to choose someone that you both trust, and then they have to be clear on their role is to listen, clarify, and help design a path, not take sides. And number 5, take space intentionally. Sometimes the best move is not another round of the same conversation. Instead, you can say, I don't think we're going to solve this well right now. Can we take 24 hours, reflect, and come back to it? The difference between this and avoidance is intention. You set a time to return, and then you actually do. And none of these tools guarantee that every conflict ends neatly, but they do turn an impasse from a dead end into a point where you can choose your next move a little bit more deliberately. Now, to help wrap this up, let's talk about just some everyday best practices for managing conflict. These are small habits that over time completely change the tone of your difficult conversations. So number 1, slow down your first reaction. When you feel that surge of emotion, defensiveness, anger, shame, your first reaction is rarely your best. So practice buying yourself a moment. Take a breath. Notice, oh, okay, I'm triggered right now. I'm activated right now. Choose curiosity over attack. Sometimes just a simple, give me a second, I want to respond thoughtfully, can shift the whole conversation. Number 2, use I statements, not accusations. This one's really important. Instead of saying things like, you never listen, you're so disrespectful, you always change the plan, you. We don't want to say you because that's accusatory. And we also want to avoid always and never because those are absolutes. Instead, you want to try, I feel unheard when I'm interrupted. I feel disrespected when decisions change without looping me in. I get anxious when the plan keeps shifting last minute. So if you notice, you're still naming the problem, but you're talking about your experience and your emotions, and you're not attacking their character. The minute somebody feels attacked, that activates their amygdala, and they go into fight or flight, and they're no longer trying to engage. It is now fight or flight. And the third tip is probably my favorite. We have to separate the person from the problem. It's important to hold this frame every time you have conflict. It's us versus the problem, not me versus you. Keep bringing the conversation back to the shared goal, the impact you both want to have, the system and process you're both trying to improve. This helps reduce blame and defensiveness. Number 4, check for understanding. Just simple phrases like, okay, what I'm hearing you say is blank. Did I get that right? So paraphrasing is really important. Let me repeat this back to make sure that I understand. These moves do 2 things. They show respect, and they prevent you from arguing with a version of their view that isn't accurate. Number 5, name your own needs clearly. We have to be both cooperative and assertive, and you have to be assertive about your own needs. A lot of conflict drags on because one or both people never clearly say what they actually need. So practice finishing this sentence. What I need in this situation is, and it might sound something like more predictability in our deadlines, to be consulted before big changes, a clear decision today, even if we revisit it later, an apology for how that was handled. Now, you're not guaranteed to get everything that you need, but you have to communicate it. But I can tell you, unspoken needs are impossible to meet. So you have to say something. Number 6, agree on how you'll handle conflict as an entire system. Especially in teams, don't wait for a crisis. Talk about conflict before you're in one. How do you want to give each other feedback? What do we do when someone feels disrespected? What's our process when we're deadlocked? Who can we bring in if we need a neutral perspective? Write it down, make it a part of how you work, not just something that you like improvise under stress. I've done this with many teams before, and I'm telling you too, creating conflict ground rules with your partner, with your team, whoever you have conflict with is really powerful because you set the guidelines on how you're going to have conflict. So you don't have to figure it out when it happens. You already have a plan. And then number 7, and something I always remind everyone, protect the relationship while addressing the issue. Remember, the goal is not just to win this argument. It's to keep the relationship strong enough to handle the next one. And sometimes that means owning your part. I can see how my tone escalated things. Saying sorry without a paragraph of justification. Or ending a hard conversation with, hey, I know this was tough, but I appreciate that we stayed with it. Over time, these small moves build culture at home and at work where conflict isn't something to fear. It's something you know how to walk through together. Okay, so let's land this. Friend, conflict isn't going away, but your relationship to conflict can change. You've learned today that conflict is a clash of needs, values, goals, and perspective, and it's information, not just chaos, that there's different types of conflict, task, process, relationship, values, and naming the type helps you respond better. Power dynamics are always in the room, and if you hold more power, your job is to create safety, not just to win. We know now there's a large difference between conflict resolution and conflict management. One is an event, and the other is an ongoing practice. We all have default conflict styles, and the goal is to use them intentionally, not automatically. Resolution isn't perfect. It's not a perfect solution. It's a path forward that you can walk together. When you hit an impasse, you can change the question, surface what really matters, run time-bound experience, bring in a mediator, or take space intentionally. And there are everyday habits, slowing down, using I statements, checking for understanding, naming needs, that make every conflict a little healthier. If you found this helpful, take one conflict in your life this week, at work or at home, and try just one new tool from this episode. Maybe it's asking what matters most to you in this. Maybe it's naming the type of conflict. Or maybe it's proposing a small experiment instead of arguing for the perfect answer. Conflict is unavoidable, but growth through conflict, that's a choice. Friend, thank you for listening to Built to Grow. If this episode gave you something useful, share it with someone who's in the middle of a tough conversation right now. And if you haven't already, hit follow so that you don't miss any future episodes. And also please check out my free Patreon account where I have more resources and courses on these topics. So check those out. Friend, I will see you in the next one. Thank you.